15 minutes ahead of schedule.
Wow.
Unusual in such gatherings.
I won't take advantage of that. I'm grateful to the organizers, Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, Vijay Mahajan ji, the Anhad team led by Shabnam, the national movement led by Saurabh Bajpai, and my scientist come poet friend Gohar Raza for making this event possible. I'm also extremely grateful for such an esteemed panel who have made time to come and speak at this event, particularly two members of parliament while the parliament is in session. I'm really, really very grateful. And as you can see, that they do not belong to the same party at all, and yet they're all Nehruvians, and I think that speaks volumes. I'm grateful also to Penguin for publishing the book, and equally importantly for their resolve to bring it out in Hindi very soon. I'm humbled at the presence of the people on the dais who are much better experts on Nehru than me perhaps, as well as so many in the audience who I know are experts on Nehru. I'm humbled to speak about Nehru in their presence. The very fact that so many have gathered today, I believe they've done so because they're rallying around the Nehruvian idea. They want to recognize the fact that however much Nehru is demonized or his memory is sought to be erased, the people are still anguished that the idea of India that he stood for is being so brutally, mercilessly trampled upon by forces who did not believe in this idea of India, an idea of India which emerges out of the freedom movement, which is crystallized in our constitution, and it is being demonized by people who neither participated in the freedom movement, in fact cooperated with the British in dividing the Indian people, and it is they who now critique Nehru and the Nehruvians, people sitting on the dais, as secular, deshdrohis, left mafia, tukre tukre gang, Andolan Jivi, Parjivi, and what have you. So Nehru, as we know, heroically took on the Herculean task of lifting India from what Tagore described as the mud and filth left behind by the British. When the British left India, the average life expectancy was less than 30 years. For those who are busy telling us that nothing happened in the last 70 years, remind them that what Nehru inherited, the initial conditions with which he began, the average life expectancy was less than 30. 84% of the people were illiterate. 94% of women were illiterate. The country was deeply divided on the basis of religion. We were facing famine conditions. Just 4 years before independence, 3 million died of famine. So from that situation, to be able to build a secular, democratic, humanitarian, humane, as Manojji said, country was indeed a huge, huge effort. The legacy that Nehru left behind was one which was not only something that he left behind for the Indian people, but I believe for the peoples of the world, all over the world, who came out of colonial domination and were now trying to bring in modernization. And he left behind a model of trying to do so with democracy and sovereignty intact. I think Prabhat made references to the Nehruvian model being, in fact, I believe, and I've argued that in the book, it is a unique model in world history where you make the transition to industrialism and to modernization with democracy and sovereignty intact. No country ever did it. So it's something that we must recognize and learn from. Nehru's enormous contribution to the making of modern India has been reiterated by the earlier speakers. I think India was lucky that at the time of the birth of the nation state, to have had a leadership of the quality and caliber of Gandhiji and Nehru. Imagine today having a prime minister who's educated. I mean, that's asking a lot, isn't it? Leave alone a great global statesman with exceptional intellectual caliber who could inspire poets, writers, revolutionaries. Seema has talked about fairs. If you read Purushottam's book, you will see so many examples of poets, writers, revolutionaries being inspired by him, of film actors, musicians, scientists, economists, historians, bureaucrats, social activists, as well as the common masses getting inspired by Nehru. This is absolutely amazing. He, like Gandhiji, inspired the highest ideals of humanity among people rather than appeal to the basest instincts in order to gain popularity as is being done today. I have in this book tried to detail some of the key lessons we can learn from Nehru in today's dark times. I've discussed how Nehru laid the foundations of a democratic structure and democratic institutions in India, a legacy we seem to be abandoning, with the world at large no longer accepting India as a democracy. The democratic backsliding has been talked about by various institutions, and we are now, believe you me, described as an electoral autocracy. The word democracy has disappeared in the description, from the description of India. I mean, such an utter shame that I cannot even imagine. We now, I've talked about the pro-poor orientation that Nehru brings about, how he makes the socialist objective acceptable to a wide variety of Indian people. And in a situation of today, I constantly refer back to what is happening today, where we are witnessing, as Prabhat has pointed out, obscene levels of inequality, while we go about bragging of the number of millionaires, never mind the skullduggery with which they got their fortune. They are now even being protected, so much so that you cannot even discuss them in Parliament, despite the best efforts of members here. You cannot even discuss them. That is the level at which our democracy has reached. I've talked about Nehru. I think an important aspect, he's anticipating the knowledge revolution from the 1950s itself. One of the first in India to anticipate the knowledge revolution, move in that direction. The first plan is not only about steel plants and irrigation dams, it's all about setting up of knowledge institutions, of which all of us are product, and which enables India's current economy. More than half our GDP is produced by the service sector, and the service sector, to a very large extent, is based on the knowledge economy. I have also talked about Nehru promoting a scientific temper. He's talking of a university where, I'm quoting him, tolerance, reason, adventure of ideas, and the search for truth will occur. In a situation now where we are putting students in jail without bail, without a trial for years, such as my own student, Omar Khalid, and in a situation where our Prime Minister and our Vice President, in their utmost discovery of science, talk about plastic surgery in ancient India, and the Governor of Bengal talked about Arjun having nuclear-tipped arrows, and as a result he got promoted to becoming Vice President, and so on and so forth. And of course, the radar's not going through clouds and stuff like that. So scientific temper has been made a matter of joke. I will today highlight only two aspects in the given time that I have. which probably hasn't been talked about so much. The first one, which is I have a long section in the book on Nehru and the discipline of history. While writing this, I was absolutely awestruck by Nehru's deep understanding of the discipline of history and his ability in practicing that discipline himself. It is not for nothing that perhaps the tallest living historian that we have in India, Professor Irfan Habib, who very kindly also wrote the foreword to this book, that he should say the following. While referring to Nehru's outstanding historical works, The Glimpses of World History, his autobiography, and The Discovery of India, all written in jail between 1930 and 1944, Irfan Habib says, these prison works invite comparison in both quality and quantity, mind you, in both quality and quantity with the kind of writing that the iconic intellectual Antonio Gramsci produced as a communist prisoner in fascist Italy. I mean, this is also in the context, as Purushottam referred, that our communists at some points of time did not understand this. They were critical of Nehru. And I think Professor Habib is really making a very important point, reminding everybody that we need to remember him in the right spirit. And he goes on to say, there are true similarities in both Gramsci's writings and Nehru's. They both went to history to find answers to the questions raised in their minds as men of action. That is, in order to do what they want to do for the future, they went back into history. And Nehru does a wonderful job of that. There is yet, I believe, no substitute for The Discovery of India, written in the 1940s in prison, by hand, with hardly any corrections. The manuscript is available in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. You see it, that he wrote by hand the whole discovery of India, without hardly any correction. And such a sweeping history of India from the ancient past to the present, I believe still hasn't been written by anybody else. So it's an amazing feat. What he has to say in the 1930s and 40s about the discipline of history, if I will just summarize in 3 or 4 lines, is quite mind-boggling. He says, how we need to write history. He said we need to write a people's history and not that of kings and queens and battles and stuff, which the boring stuff that Seema mentioned. He said, it is only then, I'm quoting him, that we really clothe the dry bones of history with life, flesh and blood. Only when we write people's history. How he said, the big picture must always form the backdrop, and the historian is not to get lost in the petty details. How global, or what is now called fashionably connected histories, is critical for understanding larger historical forces. He says how historical writing must reach the common people, not just a group of fellow historians, much before Dalrymple reminded us about it. How history writing must be, this is important, must be linked to a humane vision of the future and not used to arouse hatred, violence, and destruction as it is being done today globally. The use of history and memory to promote violence globally is a huge phenomenon, and Nehru is warning against it in the 1950s. I will particularly focus today only on one factor, which is Nehru and what we can learn from him about combating communalism. Many in the dais have spoken about it. I would just like to add my 2 bit to that. As has been said, Nehru was faced with the communal challenge, the biggest challenge to the idea of India at the birth of the nation itself. The period 46 to 48 was what can be described as a Holocaust-like situation. 500,000 people killed, millions made homeless, 6 million refugees coming into India, the communal temperature at its peak, and at the end of it, we have the murder of the Mahatma. And Nehru says it was not an act of an individual. He describes, I'm quoting him, he described it as an effort at a coup d'etat, which was planned to enable the group concerned, and he means the RSS, to capture power. That is, they were trying to utilize the situation of communal frenzy to change the nature of the state itself and capture power. And to the eternal regret of the communalists, and that is why they hate Nehru so much. Nehru, along with other stalwarts of the freedom struggle, did not allow the heightened communal situation to change the vision of the freedom struggle. Gandhi and Nehru made the protection of the democratic rights of every citizen of the country the primary objective. Gandhiji's last fast was to say that every Muslim who has been thrown out of his home in Delhi must be brought back, the mosques must be repaired, otherwise he said, I will die. And of course he paid for it with his life. Gandhi and Nehru were not afraid of the M word. They openly, directly defended the right of every Muslim to be an Indian citizen, just like any one of us. Nehru turned again something I think we and our politicians need to learn. He turned the first general election, the only election I believe still, which has been fought with almost like a referendum on the issue of communalism. Do we want, he said, a Hindu Rashtra which will be a mirror image of Muslim Pakistan? Or do we want a secular India? And he campaigned relentlessly all over the country with that, essentially that message. And it is a tribute to the legacy of our 100-year-old freedom struggle, the revolution that Shanta talked about, that at the end of it, in the first general election, within just a few years of the Holocaust-like situation of communal frenzy, overwhelming majority of the Indians voted in favor of a secular India. The Hindu Mahasabha, the Jansangh, these are the predecessors of our current BJP, and the Ram Rajya Parishad all put together got only 10 seats out of 489 and only 6% of the votes. So communalism had been pushed back in that election, and something we can learn from, that even from that situation we can recover. So surely from our current situation too we can fight back. In that, I think I will just point out 3 or 4 lessons that Nehru learns from that election and he wants us to learn. And this is essentially aimed at us who are also trying to influence in our own ways Indian politics. He says about the election, he says, having virtually decimated the communal forces in the first election of 51-52, despite the charged communal atmosphere, Nehru had the following to say. I'm quoting, "One good thing that has emerged from these elections is our straight fight and success against communalism. We have seen at last that we need not be afraid of communalism, we need not compromise with it. When we fight it in straight and honest way, we win. When we compromise with it, we lose." A lesson we did not learn. So from the mid-60s onwards, we began compromising with communalists. All range of secular forces compromised with communalists in the provinces. In 1977, we did it at the national level. And in 1989, we again did it at the national level. So the BJP, which the Hindu communalists who were untouchables earlier, about whom you could not speak in decent company, now got legitimacy, and today they are all pervasive. So a big lesson needed to be learned there, and we still need to learn. We do not need to compromise with it in order for short-term electoral gains. Secondly, Nehru said that while electoral success is significant and heartening, it is now by no means a complete success. After the 51 victory, he is saying this. He says an ideological battle along with state power had to be used to uproot, I'm quoting him, this despicable communalism. It must be obliterated from the land so that it may not take root again. This poison has permeated the land. He warned that just banning an organization and putting them in jail, that is what was done, as you know. The RSS was banned and 25,000 of them were put in jail. After doing that, he says, just banning an organization and putting them in jail is not enough. He says, those who are impelled by faith can only be defeated by a higher idealism. And the higher idealism that Nehru offered was a humane, inclusive nationalism. Purushottam made references to this, that you cannot abandon the nationalist platform, as we have often tended to do, the secular forces in the country included, by denigrating our national movement, by making fun of it, from Gandhi, Nehru, down to Tilak, to whoever. We cannot allow, and that is what we have handed over on a platter almost, the nationalist platform to those who Nehru rightly described as anti-national. We cannot afford to do that. The nationalist space has to be recovered. And Hindu nationalism, this was referred to, and I've talked about that in a book. It's an oxymoron. In a multi-religious country, you cannot be Hindu nationalist. And therefore, Nehru called them squarely anti-national. We must bury this concept. It's their self-description. Nobody during the national movement called a Hindu communalist Hindu nationalist. The word nationalist just did not gel with communalism. Communalism went with loyalism, just as secularism went with democracy. So the phrase was secular democracy and communal loyalists. And that is how we need to think about them. We must remember that we did none of this. We neither used state power, nor did we do an ideological battle. Despite Godhra, despite 2002, and we were in power, by we I meaning secular forces, for 10 years, 2004 to 14, nobody went to jail. Despite Godhra, despite Justice Loya, despite Babri Masjid demolition, and neither was a mass-level campaign launched to fight against communalism. And this is something that we need to look at. Finally, Nehru was among the first, as has been referred to see communalism, I'm quoting it in his own words, as the Indian version of fascism. He called communalism as an Indian version of fascism. First, he described the Muslim League as a fascist party, and then he described the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha equally as fascist. The Amartya Sen later coined the phrase communal fascism, and Prabhat, in a recent piece, has described it as fascism arriving in camouflage. But I think there is now a general acceptance that what we are witnessing is the arrival of fascism. And Nehru warned us, again very early in 1951. He said, I'm quoting him, communalism is diametrically opposed to democracy and usually relied on Nazi and fascist methods. Ultimately, the result would be, if we follow this path, he says, ultimately the result would be similar to what happened to Hitler and fascism in Europe. I do not want India to follow this terrible path. It is not too late to heed this warning and attempt a course correction. We must remember the important lesson from history of fascism in the world is that you have to unite all anti-fascist forces if we are to defeat fascism. It is no longer a battle between the left and the right. It is a battle to save the great achievements of human civilization. It is a battle to save democracy and liberty from the forces of fear, hatred, and barbarism. India is today with this grave choice between these two alternatives, and we need Nehru's wisdom and his example to choose correctly and learn how to fight. Thank you very much.